Hey guys. Tonight we're stepping into a place most medieval chroniclers would rather you didn't visit, the army camp at night. The torches flicker, armor clinks in the cold air. And somewhere between the smell of sweat, iron, and burning animal fat, a strange stillness hums. You can almost hear the restless shifting of men wrapped in coarse wool blankets. Their swords by their sides. And their thoughts far from God. Out here, under the stars and the shadow of banners. Desire didn't disappear. It just had to disguise itself. And honestly, if you had to march for weeks without a bath, sleep on dirt, and share a tent with 6 snoring soldiers, you'd probably go a little mad too. You're about to find out how medieval warriors, armored, pious, and perpetually exhausted, tried to handle the most human of urges in the most inhuman of places. And trust me, some of their solutions might make you question the definition of chivalry. You wouldn't last a day in their boots, or, let's be honest, their underwear. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, tell me in the comments, where are you listening from? And what time is it for you right now? Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You walk through the narrow aisles of the medieval camp, where tents rise like dull gray mushrooms sprouting from the mud. The evening is quiet, except for distant laughter near the cook fires. A group of soldiers huddle over a pot of stew that smells more like desperation than food. You can feel the mixture of exhaustion and tension hanging in the air, the kind of tension that's not just about battle. Medieval warfare wasn't constant fighting. Most of it was waiting, endless days of boredom, fatigue, and suppressed longing. In that stagnant in-between, men grew restless. Their minds drifted toward home, toward the women they'd left behind, toward the warmth of a body that wasn't armored or weaponized. They told jokes, the kind that made priests faint, and carved crude shapes on their shields just to feel human again. You pass by a tent where a knight polishes his sword, the rhythmic motion oddly hypnotic. The weapon gleams like liquid moonlight. He's not thinking about combat, not really. He's thinking about control, discipline, the same restraint that the church demanded of his flesh. Every swing, every prayer, every night alone, all of it designed to tame the animal within. But no amount of prayer could erase the fact that these men were made of the same blood and bone as everyone else. Some of them believed that desire was a test from God, something to overcome through fasting, flagellation, or, in one famously ridiculous case, sleeping on beds of thorns. Imagine rolling over in your sleep and realizing repentance suddenly hurts a lot more than sin ever did. Others took a more practical route. Medieval camps were filled with people who weren't exactly soldiers, cooks, armorers, merchants, and yes, women. Some followed the armies to sell bread or mend clothes. But others offered comfort of a different kind. Chroniclers called them camp followers, as if that label could contain the complexity of what really went on. For many women, it was survival. For many men, it was escape. Of course, the church hated every bit of it. Priests traveling with armies would deliver fiery sermons about chastity, declaring that lust would doom the campaign. And yet, those same priests sometimes heard confessions that made them blush so hard they probably needed divine cooling afterward. One bishop in the 13th century reportedly complained that soldiers confessed the same sins every week, which, to be fair, probably meant business was booming. In the dim glow of a fire, a young archer stares into the flames. He has a crude token hanging from his neck, a lock of hair tied with red thread. Maybe it belonged to someone waiting back home. Or maybe it's just a reminder that he used to feel something softer than steel and leather. He whispers a name, one the night will quickly swallow. Desire in war was a secret language. A shared glance. A hand brushing too long when passing a cup of wine. A whispered promise that no one would remember in the morning. There were rules. Of course, not written ones. But ones enforced by fear, shame, and sometimes exhaustion. You couldn't afford distraction when tomorrow might be your last day alive. Yet somehow, the heart didn't care. You crouch beside the fire, and the smoke curls around your face like incense. There's something almost sacred about this unspoken yearning. The men laugh too loudly, drink too much, pretend too hard that they're not aching. You can sense that under the armor. Every one of them is still just a person, craving touch, warmth, and meaning in a world that keeps demanding blood. Historians still debate how openly these needs were met in medieval campaigns. Some argue that commanders turned a blind eye to maintain morale. Others claim strict codes were enforced, with punishment for indecent acts. But if history teaches anything, it's that rules melt quickly when loneliness freezes the soul. The wind picks up, the camp quiets down. Somewhere, a soldier sings a song about a girl by the river, his voice cracked. Gentle, half prayer, half memory. You don't understand all the words, but you feel the ache behind them. The melody floats through the night, brushing over tents, armor, and dreams alike. You look up, and the stars shimmer faintly above the smoky haze. Out here, miles from comfort, desire was less about pleasure and more about survival. A reminder that even in war, people long to feel alive. You can almost hear the pulse of centuries whispering through the dark, asking the same questions you do. What does it mean to be human, when everything around you insists you shouldn't be? The embers dim, and the camp falls asleep one by one. You linger, listening to the hush settle over the field. Tomorrow, they'll fight again, but tonight, they're just men beneath the armor, haunted by both life and longing. And as you close your eyes, the fire cracks softly, like a heartbeat trying to remember warmth. The dawn seeps into the camp like a slow spill of ash. You wake to the low groans of men stretching, armor creaking, and horses snorting against the frost. The air tastes of smoke and unwashed humanity, a perfume that only centuries of war could perfect. Around you, men rub sleep from their eyes, mutter prayers, and pretend they haven't dreamed of anything but victory. But deep down, every one of them knows that last night's silence was louder than battle drums. You rise, brushing off the dirt, and watch them prepare for another day. Some sharpen swords. Others laugh about things that aren't funny, jokes about women, sin, and ale. The kind of laughter that hides exhaustion. That masks the ache behind the ribs. You can almost see it. That quiet loneliness wrapped tight beneath every breastplate. Medieval warfare was not glamorous. For every glorious charge sung about by bards, there were weeks of waiting, of marching through mud, of sleeping beside strangers who snored and swore in the same breath. There was no privacy, no softness, no escape, and when human desire met such conditions, it didn't vanish, it twisted. It turned inward, warped by guilt and discipline until it became a ghost whispering in the ear. Some chroniclers called it the night's burden, the unspoken torment of the flesh. Monks writing far from the battlefield imagined knights as holy warriors, their purity protected by faith and cold water. But those monks had never spent a night on campaign. They didn't know how the body betrays itself, how the mind can drift toward warmth even as death lingers nearby. You pass by a young soldier rinsing his face with water so cold it bites his skin. He mutters something under his breath, a prayer, maybe, or a curse disguised as one. There's a hint of shame in his movements, as if washing away not just dirt but desire. Many truly believed that lust could weaken them, sap their courage, invite divine punishment. The church told them that. Their captains told them that. And so, they learned to fear their own nature more than the enemy's sword. Still, you can't silence what you are. Some soldiers sought ways to distract themselves. They gambled, drank, sang, anything to fill the gaps between battles. Others, well, they didn't fight it so hard. Whispers spread about men who snuck away into the woods at night. About couples formed from shared fear and cold. There were punishments, of course, but punishment didn't erase the hunger. It only made it hide deeper. The knights had their own rituals. Some tied belts of chain around their waists, thinking the discomfort would remind them of their vows. Others carried relics of saints, bones, teeth, fragments of robes, hoping holy proximity could burn away temptation. There's even a story of one noble who had his squire whip him every time he felt desire stirring, which must have made for some very awkward mornings. You watch a priest stroll through camp, murmuring blessings. He looks as tired as the men he blesses. His robe is muddy, his cross dulled by dust. You wonder if he, too, feels the pull of temptation when night falls, if his eyes linger too long when a woman passes, or if he ever wakes from dreams he shouldn't have. Priests were men, after all, just wrapped in different armor. The medieval church tried to build walls between purity and passion, but the human heart kept finding cracks. And on the battlefield, where every sunrise could be the last, those cracks widened. You can't ban desire any more than you can ban fear. It just slips under the tent flap, soft as smoke. Some commanders understood this, even if they'd never admit it. They organized rest days in towns conveniently full of taverns and women, pretending it was about morale. Officially, it wasn't encouraged. Unofficially, it kept soldiers from tearing each other apart. One chronicle even describes a commander who justified such indulgence as preventing worse sins, which is medieval code for please don't riot. You picture the contrast. By day, they were divine instruments of justice. By night, fragile men clutching their desires like contraband. It's almost funny, if it weren't so heartbreakingly human. And then there were those who swore off it all, the celibate warriors. They believed that chastity brought divine favor, that resisting desire made them invincible. Maybe it did, for a while, but even they weren't immune. There are letters, never meant to be read, where knights confess to temptations in dreams, to thoughts of wives, lovers, or even fellow soldiers. The Church forgave them, as long as they repented. Again and again. Historians still debate whether these vows were kept. Some say the pious knights truly lived in restraint. Others point out the suspicious number of visits to the infirmary that coincided with nights in town. The truth, like so much of history, is blurry. What's certain is that no one, not even a man in armor, could fully silence the call of the body. The morning deepens. Sunlight crawls through the mist, painting the camp in pale gold. You hear the blacksmith's hammer, the clatter of hooves, the muttered prayers before battle. Life moves on, endlessly, brutally. But beneath all that steel and ritual, there's still a pulse, steady and warm, refusing to be crushed by war. You watch them march out, banners flapping in the wind, faces hidden behind helmets. Each man carries more than just weapons. He carries longing, guilt, hope, and the quiet wish that maybe, someday, peace will mean more than the end of fighting. Maybe it will mean the right to be human again. The camp empties. You're left alone with the echo of footsteps, the ghost of laughter, and the faint scent of burned wood. The wind sighs through the empty tents, whispering secrets no chronicle ever dared to write down. By nightfall, the camp changes its face again. The fires burn low, turning every tent flap into a curtain of flickering amber. You walk past them slowly, listening. The laughter now sounds different, quieter, edged with fatigue. The songs are slower too, like lullabies sung to exhaustion. And beneath it all, there's that pulse again, the low, steady hum of life refusing to die. Even here, you find a small bathhouse on the edge of camp, if you can call it that. It's a wooden shack with smoke curling from the roof. The air thick with steam and human chatter. Soldiers slip in and out, wrapped in thin cloths, their armor stacked outside like sleeping beasts. For the first time all day, they're unarmed, unguarded, and almost gentle. Inside, the heat hits you like a wave. The air smells of sweat, ash, and rosemary. Someone must have tossed herbs into the boiling water to chase away both stench and sin. Men sit shoulder to shoulder in the half-light, their laughter echoing off wet walls. Some scrub dirt from their skin as if they could wash away the memory of killing. Others lean back with eyes closed, letting warmth soak into bones that have forgotten comfort. Bathhouses in the Middle Ages were strange sanctuaries. They were places of cleansing, both spiritual and suspiciously not. The Church frowned upon them, whispering that too much cleanliness led to temptation. Which, to be fair, was often true, because when bodies met warmth and water after weeks of cold steel and filth, the line between purification and pleasure blurred faster than holy ink on parchment. You spot a pair of knights sitting across from each other, their faces flushed from heat and drink. One mutters a prayer before stepping into the pool, the other rolls his eyes and murmurs, "God will forgive the dirt, not the smell." They laugh, clinking cups of weak wine. You can't tell if they're mocking sin or savoring it. Maybe both. There were rules, of course, always rules. Men and women were supposed to bathe separately. But in traveling camps and frontier towns, such divisions were, let's say, fluid. Merchants, washerwomen, and even nurses often shared these bathhouses. And walls were rarely sturdy enough to keep curiosity contained. Many medieval bathhouses offered food, drink, and companionship for a few coins more. You could call it hospitality. The priests called it heresy. You sink down beside the steaming pool and watch the water ripple. A soldier with a scar across his chest tells a story about a village bathhouse in Burgundy where you once met a woman who smelled of lavender and honey. His voice softens as he speaks, as if that memory belongs to another life, one with clean sheets, sunlight, and no screaming. He laughs, but the sound trembles. You realize these stories aren't about lust. They're about remembering what tenderness felt like before war stripped it away. Somewhere behind you, a priest enters the bathhouse, his robe damp with rain. The men fall silent, the air thick with awkward reverence. The priest mutters a blessing, though his eyes dart quickly away from the half-naked bodies around him. You almost feel bad for him, trapped between doctrine and desire, holiness and heat. You wonder how many sermons he'll have to preach tomorrow just to forget tonight. For all their sins, the bathhouses were equalizers. Here, a peasant could sit beside a knight, a merchant beside a monk, and for a brief, steaming moment, they were all just human, weary, yearning, alive. Some scholars later wrote that such places weakened discipline. Maybe they simply reminded men what being human meant. And that was far more dangerous than any sword. The water ripples again, catching the glow of the firelight. You imagine it carrying whispers, secrets, and laughter through the camp. For all the moral panic, the bathhouse was a fragile truce between body and soul, purity and pleasure, sin and survival. One soldier raises his cup, grinning, and says, "To the saints who forgive us faster than our wives." The others laugh, and you can't help but smile too. The joke is old, worn smooth by repetition, but there's comfort in it. A reminder that humor is just another kind of prayer. As the night deepens, steam curls around your face, blurring the edges of everything. The sound of water sloshing becomes hypnotic, like the rhythm of the sea. You close your eyes and drift. The laughter fades, replaced by the murmur of confessions half meant and half forgotten. Some men here will fight tomorrow. Some will die. But tonight, they are simply washing away the dirt of war, and maybe, if they're lucky, the weight of being alone. Historians still debate whether medieval bathhouses were dens of sin or havens of sanity. The truth, as always, is slippery. What's certain is that they were one of the few places where men could drop both armor and pretense. And in a world built on duty, guilt, and blood, that was the closest thing to freedom most of them ever found. When you finally step outside, the cold air bites your skin, sharp and clean. The camp is quiet now, only the occasional snore or cough breaking the silence. The stars are clear tonight, scattered like silver coins across the black sky. You tilt your head back and breathe. The chill stings, but beneath it, you feel something almost sacred, a strange, tender peace that has nothing to do with purity, and everything to do with being alive. You linger a while, watching the last plumes of steam drift into the night, dissolving into the darkness like forgotten prayers. The next morning greets you with the clamor of movement. Hooves stomp against wet ground. Armor plates snap into place. And voices call out orders muffled by fog. The army is preparing to move. But not everyone marching wears steel. You notice the women, dozens of them, carrying baskets. leading mules, holding children close. They are the ones history calls camp followers, though their lives were anything but simple shadows. You trail behind them as the column begins to move, the sound of creaking wagons and rattling pots filling the air. It's strange how easily these women blend into the chaos, invisible, yet essential. Without them, the army wouldn't eat, its wounds wouldn't heal, and its spirits would rot faster than the food. They were the cooks, laundresses, merchants, healers, and sometimes, the comforters. No one spoke it aloud, but everyone knew. You see a young woman in a patched dress walking beside a soldier. Their hands brush every few steps. They don't look at each other, but the silence between them says everything. Camp followers existed at the blurry intersection of survival and scandal. Some were wives who refused to stay home, unwilling to let their husbands vanish into war. Others were widows with no other way to live but by following the only economy left standing, the military one. And then there were those who offered what the soldiers needed most: touch, affection, or just the illusion of it. You watch a group of men unload supplies while a few women barter nearby. One trades bread for a clean shirt. Another sharpens knives for a coin. The line between service and intimacy shifts like the fog around their feet. Nobody says the word prostitute. Not here. It's too simple a word for such a complicated existence. A priest rides by on a mule, his eyes fixed on the horizon, pretending not to see. He's been preaching chastity since dawn, yet you can tell even he's grown tired of his own voice. He knows what's happening in the tents at night, the whispered laughter, the quiet rustling. He also knows that trying to stop it would be like shouting at the rain. You overhear two knights talking as they adjust their saddles. One jokes, "If God didn't want us to seek comfort, He wouldn't have made nights so long." The other smirks and replies, "Then may He forgive us before dawn." They both laugh, the kind of laughter that comes from people who have stopped pretending they're pure. For the women, the road was a cruel companion. They walked the same miles, faced the same hunger, the same plague. Some gave birth between battles, wrapped their babies in spare cloaks, and kept marching. Others died nameless, buried where the army paused for lunch. Yet somehow, they persisted, ghosts with beating hearts, following the drumbeat of survival. You pass a wagon carrying barrels of ale and bundles of linen. Inside, a girl hums softly, a song you recognize from last night's bathhouse. Her voice drifts through the morning air, almost too fragile for this brutal world. The men nearby pause to listen. For a moment, even the armor seems quieter. History rarely mentions their names. Chroniclers wrote about kings and generals, never about the woman who washed their clothes or held their hand the night before battle. But the truth is, armies marched because of them. When food ran low, they scavenged. When men fell sick, they nursed. And when despair crept in, they offered warmth, not as sin, but as mercy. You watch one woman, older than the rest, stir a pot over a fire. Her hands are rough, her face lined with dirt and wisdom. A young soldier approaches shyly, handing her a piece of bread. She smiles, a small, weary smile that seems to hold the entire war inside it. For a second, he's not a warrior, and she's not a follower. They're just two people finding a flicker of kindness in the mud. There were attempts to regulate them. Of course, Medieval armies often set rules, how many women could follow, where they could sleep, what they could do. But rules crumble fast when hunger and loneliness press in. Some commanders tolerated them quietly, others punished them publicly. Still, they returned, every time, like the tide. Historians still argue about the morality of it all, whether these women were victims, survivors, or opportunists. The truth is messier than that. They were human. They did what they had to, in a world that gave them no other choice. As the sun climbs higher, the march stretches on. The road winds through empty fields and blackened villages. Somewhere ahead, another battle waits. The soldiers' jokes fade into silence. Their steps heavier now, but the women keep walking, always just behind the line. Close enough to witness the fight, far enough to be forgotten. You watch them disappear into the mist, their shapes swallowed by the rhythm of war, and you realize that behind every tale of courage and conquest, there are quieter stories, of hands that fed the brave, of voices that soothed the broken, of love that existed where it shouldn't have. And yet, somehow, did. The fog thickens, the sound of drums fades, and as you stand there, surrounded by the ghosts of footsteps, you can't help but think that history was written by the men who fought, but it was carried by the women who followed. By evening, the camp settles in a ruined village, half walls, charred beams, and the faint smell of smoke that never quite fades. You walk among the rubble, feeling the weight of stories buried under every stone. Soldiers set up fires where hearths once stood, hanging their helmets on the remains of doorframes like strange, metallic wreaths. The women unpack baskets, children chase shadows, and life, somehow, insists on continuing. You sit beside a merchant who's spreading out goods on a worn blanket, bits of cheese, dried figs, and something wrapped in cloth that smells suspiciously like cheap perfume. He winks at you. Business, he says, is always good when people pretend they have no needs. He's not wrong. In war, everything became currency, food, favors, time, comfort, and among the many trades that filled the gaps of supply chains and human longing, desire itself was the most complicated one. It wasn't just about lust, it was about negotiation, about survival, about moments of control in a world built entirely on chaos. A soldier approaches the merchant, exchanges a few coins for a loaf of bread and, discreetly, a smile from one of the camp women sitting nearby. They vanish behind a tent flap, and no one says a word. It's not scandal, it's routine. The unspoken economy of war. The church would have called it sin. The commanders called it discipline, or rather, maintaining discipline, because an army drowning in loneliness is an army on the edge of madness. So they looked away, half pretending not to notice as long as the soldiers fought harder the next day. There's a certain absurdity to it. Men who slaughtered without hesitation being lectured about purity. The same generals who ordered massacres also issued edicts banning immoral acts in camp. One chronicler even recorded a commander who fined his men for ungodly relations, while keeping two serving girls in his own tent. History has a sense of humor that borders on cruelty. You walk through the rows of tents as night deepens. The sounds are soft, muted, murmured prayers, clinking cups, whispers that aren't about war. A woman hums an old folk tune while stirring stew. Her voice trembles like the flame she cooks over. Across from her, a soldier sits polishing his dagger. Lost in thought, their lives orbit each other quietly. Without touching, yet you can feel the pull between them, as ancient as the moon's pull on the tide. The economy of desire wasn't always about money. Sometimes it was a trade of safety for company, warmth for protection, or illusion for sanity. In a world where tomorrow might never come, people made their own bargains with fate. You overhear a conversation between two archers. "Do you think God sees what we do out here?" one asks. His tone half curious, half afraid. The other laughs softly. "If he does, he must have turned his eyes away a long time ago." Their laughter fades into the crackle of the fire. You wonder if, perhaps, that's what faith really was in these places, not the absence of sin, but the endurance of guilt. A young woman walks past carrying a jug of water. Her dress is patched, her hair covered with a scarf. The soldiers watch her, not cruelly, but like starving men looking at the memory of something they once knew. She ignores the stares. She's seen them all before. She's bartered with fear, with hunger, with death itself, and won. At least for tonight. Nearby, a boy, barely 16, sits alone. His hands shake as he turns a wooden pendant over and over between his fingers. You recognize the symbol carved into it, a small cross. Chipped at the edges. It's not piety he's clinging to, but memory. Maybe someone gave it to him before he left home. Maybe it's the only touch of love he has left in a world that's forgotten tenderness. There's a saying whispered among soldiers. Gold buys food. Faith buys forgiveness. But a warm hand buys tomorrow. It's crude, but you can't help thinking there's truth in it. Desire, in its rawest form, was never just about bodies, it was about the will to live. Historians later tried to quantify it. To label and judge. They wrote about moral decay, about corruption, but what they missed was the strange mercy buried beneath it all. These exchanges, however unholy, kept men human. They reminded them that they were more than tools of war. As the night stretches, the fires burn lower. You can hear distant singing again, soft, weary, and hauntingly beautiful. The melody drifts through the camp like smoke. A woman's voice this time, carrying words you don't understand but a tone you feel deep in your chest. It's a lullaby for the lost. For everyone pretending they're not afraid. You look around and realize that the war machine runs not just on steel and blood, but on small, fragile moments like this, stolen laughter, quiet embraces, whispered trades. Things that make no sense in the grand stories of victory and glory. Yet without them, no army could march another step. The fire beside you flickers. Shadows dancing across the torn tents and weary faces. You breathe in the heavy air. And it tastes of both guilt and grace. The world may judge these people harshly, but here, in the ruins, survival itself is a kind of prayer. And every whispered deal, every stolen glance, every act of forbidden comfort is its own form of devotion, not to God, perhaps, but to the stubborn, trembling pulse of life that refuses to die. You stay until the last fire burns out, the camp sinking into sleep. Then, quietly, you turn away, leaving behind the murmurs of an economy built on longing, loss, and the fragile hope that someone, somewhere, still remembers what love feels like. The next day begins not with sunlight, but with sermons. You wake to the sound of a priest's voice slicing through the morning fog like a bell, sharp, insistent, impossible to ignore. He's standing atop an overturned cart, one hand clutching a wooden cross, the other trembling slightly as he gestures toward the camp. "Brothers in arms," he cries. "God sees everything you do in darkness." A few soldiers snicker. One mutters, "Then he must be very tired." But most keep their heads down, pretending to listen while fastening their belts and greaves. The priest continues, voice rising and cracking, warning them that lust will drain their courage and doom their souls. It's not the first time they've heard it, and it won't be the last. You watch him, this pale, nervous man, sweating under his robes. His faith burns bright, but it's a fragile flame, flickering in the wind of everything he cannot control. He travels with the army to save souls. Yet every night he hears the proof that sin marches louder than Scripture. You wonder if he truly believes what he preaches. Maybe he does. Maybe he's terrified of what happens if he stops. When the sermon ends, the men shuffle away, leaving the priest alone with his cross and exhaustion. You see him exhale, as if releasing a weight heavier than his words. He kneels, whispers a prayer too low to catch. You catch only fragments. Forgive them. Temptation. Flesh. It sounds less like judgment, more like confession. The church was never far from war, in banners, in blessings, in rules written by men who never lifted a sword. Priests accompanied armies to hear confessions, to bless the dying, to remind soldiers that salvation was only ever one prayer away. But their presence created a strange contradiction. They had to live among the very sins they condemned. There are records, quiet, embarrassed ones, of priests who fell from grace during campaigns. Some drank too much. Some accepted comfort from camp followers. Some even justified it as ministering to the weak, which, admittedly, is a creative way to describe moral collapse. Others resisted fiercely, punishing themselves for even thinking impure thoughts. You recall one story whispered among chroniclers. A priest who tied a rope around his thigh every time he felt tempted, tightening it until he could barely walk. His body became a battlefield between holiness and hunger. Eventually, he limped his way into legend, though not for the reason he'd hoped. You move through the camp, watching the soldiers clean weapons and mend armor. Their faces are calm, almost indifferent, as if the sermon had washed over them like rain. They've heard it all before: sin, guilt, redemption, repeat. For them, faith isn't about purity, it's about hope. Hope that someone up there understands how hard it is to be human down here. Near the edge of the camp, you find a makeshift chapel, a tent draped with white cloth. The inside dimly lit by candles. A few men kneel there, confessing in hushed tones. The priest listens, nodding slowly, offering absolution like a man handing out bandages to the wounded. You wonder how many of those confessions start with the same words: "Forgive me, Father, for I am weak." Outside, the world is far less pious. A group of soldiers play dice beside a barrel of ale. One of them, losing badly, grins and says, "If I win this round, I'll skip confession this week." Another laughs, "If you win this round, God Himself will sit down and play with you." Their laughter carries through the air, cutting through the heavy silence of repentance. You can't help but think that maybe, just maybe, laughter is the truest form of prayer, raw, honest, unfiltered by fear. Still, there were moments when even the priests had to face the reality of what war did to the human spirit. They saw men weep after battle, clutching bloodied crosses in trembling hands. They heard confessions from soldiers who had sinned not out of desire, but out of loneliness. And sometimes, when the moon was high and their sermons forgotten, the priests themselves would step outside, look up at the stars, and whisper to the night, "Are you still listening, Lord?" The line between sin and survival blurred long ago. The church could preach about purity all it wanted, but in the mud and blood of the real world, absolution was as temporary as a sunrise. Historians still argue about how deeply religion controlled the soldiers' lives. Some say fear of damnation kept them in check. Others claim faith was a comfort, not a cage. The truth, as usual, lived somewhere in between. You leave the chapel tent behind and walk toward the open fields. The morning fog has lifted, revealing a sky so pale it looks almost empty. The camp stretches out before you, a mixture of holiness and hunger, faith and fatigue. It's beautiful, in a tragic way, how humans can build temples in the same dirt where they spill blood. A final thought lingers as you watch the priest pack away his cross. Perhaps forgiveness was never meant to be clean. Perhaps it was always meant to be muddied by the hands that reached for it. The wind rises, carrying with it the faint smell of incense and sweat. You breathe it in, and for a moment, you can almost taste the contradiction, divine and human, sacred and desperate, all tangled together in the same breath. You close your eyes, and the priest's words echo faintly in your head. Softer now, almost kind. May your sins be forgiven. But out here, among the tents and broken prayers, forgiveness feels less like a blessing and more like a fragile truce, one that everyone keeps breaking, just to feel alive again. Night comes quietly again, a velvet blanket spread over the camp, muffling the world into slow, uneven breaths. The air smells of smoke and damp earth, the kind that clings to your clothes and follows you into dreams. You walk between the tents, and this time, the laughter is softer, more private. The songs are gone. What remains are murmurs, whispers that sound too tender for war. You stop near a fire where two soldiers sit close, their armor lying in a careless heap beside them. They share a single cloak, shoulders touching. The older one hums a tune under his breath, a lullaby. You think, and the younger leans against him, eyes half closed. There's no shame in the gesture, no mockery, just a weary kind of peace. If you didn't know better, you might think they were brothers. But they aren't, and both know this would be unthinkable if daylight were watching. In the loneliness of the battlefield, bonds formed, some spoken, others silent. When women were far away and death was always near, affection found new shapes, shared glances, lingering touches, loyalty that went deeper than orders. Most chroniclers ignored it, a few hinted at it, calling it brotherhood beyond brotherhood. But between the lines, you can see it clearly, the unspoken truth that even forbidden tenderness has always existed, even in the shadow of swords. You sit quietly nearby, listening. Their conversation is low, half whisper, half breath. If I die tomorrow, the younger murmurs, will you remember me? The older one smiles faintly. I already do. There's no poetry in it. No scandal. Either. Just two souls trying to exist in a world that only rewards brutality. In medieval chronicles, such moments were often erased. The church labeled them as unnatural, the commanders as disruptive. But in private letters, those never meant for eyes beyond the camp, you find fragments of something real. Knights writing to their squires with a tenderness that borders on longing. Men confessing that they dreamed of their comrade's face before battle. Some historians call it camaraderie. Others whisper another word entirely. Whatever you call it, it was connection, fragile, dangerous, necessary. A soldier walks past, humming a song from his homeland. The two men pull apart instantly, straightening their backs, their expressions hardening into practiced indifference. It's astonishing how quickly people learn to wear masks, even here, where death already strips everything else away. You think about how many such stories never made it into the books. How many were buried with the men who lived them. Love, or something like it, existed in those camps. But it had to survive in secret. Wrapped in the language of loyalty and oath. My brother in arms, they called it, a phrase heavy enough to hide anything beneath. The irony, of course, is that medieval warfare demanded intimacy. Soldiers slept shoulder to shoulder, shared bread, carried each other's weight. They dressed one another in armor, a process so close, so personal, it bordered on ritual, and in that closeness, walls fell, when the world around you was reduced to blood, dirt, and prayer. Even a touch could feel divine. You walk on, past another fire where men are playing dice. The jokes are crude, the laughter forced. You can sense the tension beneath it, the constant need to appear hard. Invincible. In a culture that worshipped strength, softness became its own rebellion. And yet, in the darkest hours, that softness is what kept them alive. Somewhere in the distance, you hear a burst of argument, a soldier accusing another of improper behavior. The words are sharp, spiked with fear, because fear, not morality, was always the sharper weapon. Fear of punishment, fear of discovery, fear of being seen. The confrontation fades, ending in silence heavy as stone. You wonder how many soldiers prayed at night not for victory, but for forgiveness, not because they'd sinned, but because they'd felt something the world told them they shouldn't. Historians still argue about it. Some say medieval men were too devout, too repressed, too bound by religion. Others point to court records, letters, and quiet scandals that tell another story, one of hidden tenderness surviving in the cracks of history. The truth lies somewhere in the murk between denial and confession. The fire near you dies down to embers, glowing like small hearts beating against the dark. The two men are asleep now, their heads closed together, hands almost touching. You watch them for a moment, and a strange calm settles over you, the realization that even in a world built on cruelty, affection finds a way to breathe. Maybe that's the oldest human rebellion of all, to love, even when the world says not to. You lie back, staring at the sky. The stars above are dim through the smoke, but steady. You can almost imagine they've seen all of this before, every forbidden glance, every whispered promise, every secret kindness hidden beneath the noise of war. The wind shifts, carrying a faint scent of rain and something else, something like hope. It's fragile, easily lost, but it's there. You close your eyes, listening to the quiet rhythm of the camp, to the slow, steady breathing of men who have forgotten how to be gentle except in the dark. And as sleep creeps in, you can't help thinking, the chronicles wrote of kings and saints. But the truest history was whispered in moments like this, in the spaces where fear met longing. And love, in defiance, refused to die. Morning returns, gray and cold. You wake to the distant clang of steel on steel, the sound of men training. Pretending that discipline alone can silence everything inside them. The camp is restless again. Beyond the smoke, the banners of the knights ripple faintly, embroidered with lions, crosses, and faded prayers. You wander toward the noble quarter, where tents are larger, cleaner, and smell less like human struggle and more like privilege pretending to be piety. The knights are different, or at least they try to be. They call themselves men of honor, bound by chivalry, a word so polished and overused it's lost most of its meaning. You watch them polish armor that already gleams, quote poets they barely understand, and debate whose lady back home is the fairest of them all. Ah yes, courtly love, the great medieval invention that made longing fashionable. On parchment, it was noble, knights dedicating their valor to distant ladies, writing poems instead of love letters, swearing loyalty to a woman they might never touch. It was, in theory, purity wrapped in poetry. In practice, it was a way to talk about desire without getting burned at the stake. You pass a knight dictating a letter to his squire. Tell her, he says, that I wear her favor upon my heart, and that her eyes give me strength in battle. He pauses. No, wait. Write the memory of her eyes. That sounds holier. The squire scribbles dutifully, trying not to roll his eyes. These letters, filled with sighs and metaphors, were love affairs built entirely on distance. It was safer that way. Safer to adore a woman through ink and illusion than risk the flesh. Safer to worship the idea of love rather than its reality. Especially when that lady was usually married, and her husband had more swords than patience. Still, courtly love gave men something to cling to, an excuse for their longing. A moral shield for desire. You can almost admire the audacity of it, taking lust and wrapping it in lace and Latin until it looked like virtue. Not all knights were poets, of course. Some treated these ideals as just another game, a code to break rather than keep. You hear them boasting near the stables, voices half drowned by the snorting of horses. One kiss from a lady's hand, one says, is worth a month of sin. Then God must be very generous. Another laughs, for I am already in debt. You smile at the absurdity. For men sworn to chastity, they certainly enjoyed finding loopholes. But beneath all the pomp and posturing, there was something genuinely human about it. When you strip away the metaphors, courtly love was a cry against the brutality of their world, a reminder that beauty still mattered. Even when everything around them was blood and mud. In their own awkward, hypocritical way, these men were trying to hold on to tenderness. A troubadour walks through camp, strumming a lute and singing of love lost and found. His voice is soft, weary, the kind that seems to carry a whole winter inside it. The knights listen, some pretending to scoff, others staring quietly into the fire. You can see it in their faces, that flicker of something they'll never admit out loud. You sit beside a knight sharpening his sword. The blade catches the morning light like a mirror, reflecting your face and his. "She sent me this," he says, showing a strip of silk tied around his wrist. "Said it would keep me safe." You ask if he believes that. He laughs. "No, but I like believing it anyway." Faith, love, superstition, they all blend together here, tangled like the laces of his gauntlets. Maybe the ribbon doesn't protect him. Maybe it just reminds him that somewhere, far away, there's someone who still thinks of him as more than a weapon. Historians often romanticize this age of knights and ladies, the songs, the poetry, the gestures, but if you look closer, you find something fragile beneath the armor. Courtly love wasn't about perfection. It was about longing that could never be fulfilled, and perhaps that was the point. The unattainable keeps you alive. The achieved only reminds you of what you've lost. As afternoon fades, the troubadour's song drifts away with the wind, leaving only the steady hammering of the blacksmith and the distant murmur of prayers. The knights return to their tents, where they'll write more letters, polish more armor, and tell themselves that virtue still means something. You stay behind, watching the empty practice field. The banners flutter lazily, their colors dulled by dust. You think of all those poems written to women who would never read them. All those battles fought in their names. And you realize that even in war, people crave beauty, even if it has to be borrowed, imagined, or completely invented. When night falls, a few of the knights gather again by the fire. They drink, laugh, argue about philosophy none of them truly understand. But in their laughter, there's a softness that chivalry never accounted for, a quiet reminder that beneath the vows and poetry, they were just men trying to make meaning out of chaos. The fire crackles. One of them sighs, staring into the flames. "Do you think our ladies think of us?" he asks. Another replies, "Only when we die." They all laugh, but the sound breaks halfway, like something too fragile to carry its own weight. You turn away, walking into the dark, feeling the weight of their dreams and pretenses settle like dust on your skin. In a world where the body was chained by religion and war, desire found new disguises, songs, letters, vows, and maybe that's what it always does: adapt, survive, and whisper through whatever cracks the world leaves open. Above you, the moon rises, pale, patient, and entirely indifferent. You can almost imagine it looking down on the knights below, sighing in eternal amusement. Because for all their armor and vows, they were still human, and humanity, as you're learning, has never been very good at obeying itself. By dawn, the camp smells faintly of smoke and damp straw. A cold mist clings to everything: the tents, the horses, the sleeping men. You rise slowly, stretching stiff limbs, and notice a small commotion near the supply wagons. A healer, her apron stained with herbs and mud, is scolding a young soldier who looks both guilty and green in the face. She waves a bundle of dried leaves at him like a weapon. "You drank too much wormwood, didn't you?" she snaps. He stammers. "The priest said it would help me resist temptation." She sighs. "It'll resist your stomach first." You can't help but smile. Another miracle cure gone wrong. Superstition, medicine, and desire were tangled knots in medieval life. When men feared their own urges, they sought remedies, potions, charms, prayers, punishments, anything to tame what they couldn't name. You walk through the camp and see the evidence everywhere. Talismans tied to belts, dried flowers pinned under armor, crosses carved into sword hilts. Every man here carries his own private defense against sin. One knight shows you a ring set with a dull red stone. Keeps lust away, he claims proudly, blessed by a friar in Cologne. He doesn't mention that the same friar probably sold 10 others just like it that day. Nearby, another soldier rubs ointment onto his wrists, made from nettles and garlic. He says, supposed to cool the blood. You catch a whiff and nearly cough. The only thing it's cooling is his social life. Some men take the opposite route. A few believe that desire is like poison, best purged from the system entirely. There are whispers of monks who advised soldiers to drain the body of its weakness through secret rituals. Others claimed that cold baths cured lust. One chronicler even described a crusader who allegedly buried himself up to the neck in snow every morning to freeze out wicked thoughts. Unsurprisingly, he died of pneumonia before temptation had the chance. You wander toward the healer's tent. Inside, shelves are stacked with jars of powder and dried herbs, rosemary, mint, fennel, and stranger things, frog bones, crushed shells, tiny bags of ash. What's that one for, you ask, pointing to a jar of grayish paste. She smirks. Depends who's asking. To soldiers, I say it's for wounds. To priests, for purity. To women, for control. You raise an eyebrow. She shrugs. Sometimes medicine is just hope with a smell. Hope and fear. Medieval superstition had a remedy for everything. To kill desire, men wore belts of chastity, rings of lead, or amulets carved with prayers. Some ate bitter herbs to dry the humors, believed to cause lust. Others swore that carrying a pebble from the river Jordan could keep them pure. A few, more desperate, turned to relics, bones of saints said to suppress temptation. And yet, even the holiest talismans couldn't silence the body completely. You sit with the healer as she mixes a new batch of powder. Do they really think it works? You ask. She chuckles. Of course not, but they need to believe something does. She stirs the bowl, the herbs crackling faintly. When you're told your own skin is your enemy, you'll take comfort wherever you can find it. Outside, you hear a commotion. 2 soldiers arguing about a charm one claims has failed him. Apparently, the night before, he fell into sin, despite wearing it around his neck. His companion snorts. Maybe you wore it upside down. The laughter that follows is nervous. Everyone here knows that mocking superstition too loudly tempts fate. Historians later wrote about these practices with amusement, as examples of medieval ignorance. But watching the soldiers clutch their charms and whisper their prayers, you see something else. Desperation. Yes, but also tenderness. They were trying to survive their own humanity with the only tools they had. Even the priests weren't immune. One confessor was rumored to wear a hair shirt laced with thorns, to mortify impure thoughts. Another carried a pebble in his mouth at all times, believing that silence would choke temptation. But it wasn't silence they needed, it was understanding. You walk past a group of men sitting around a fire, trading advice like recipes. Chew sage every morning, says one. It calms the blood. Nonsense. Another replies. Pray to Saint Agnes, she was a virgin. She'll keep your body clean. A third shrugs. Or just find a tavern girl and stop pretending you're holy. They all laugh, but the sound cracks. A brittle sort of laughter that hides the truth. Nobody here really knows what to do with the war inside themselves. Later, as night falls, the healer pours you a small cup of something sharp and bitter. It's not a cure, she says, handing it to you, just something to help you sleep. People forget that rest is the first medicine. You sip it, the taste is awful, but warmth spreads through your chest. You think of all the strange remedies, the prayers, the charms, and realize that none of them are about eliminating desire. They're about managing fear, fear of losing control, fear of damnation, fear of the parts of ourselves that no sermon ever fully forgives. Outside, the camp is quiet again. The men sleep, their talismans gleaming faintly in the firelight, useless perhaps, but comforting. You look up at the stars, remembering the healer's words. Maybe medicine, faith, and superstition all serve the same purpose, to convince us that something, anything, can keep us safe from ourselves. The mist thickens. The healer snores softly beside the dying fire. You close your eyes, the taste of herbs still bitter on your tongue, and let the night swallow you whole, a sleep heavy with dreams of strange cures. Impossible purity, and the quiet, unkillable pulse of longing beneath it all. The morning fog hangs heavy over the valley as the army approaches a captured town. The banners flutter in silence. The streets are too quiet. The air thick with the kind of tension that follows violence. You step carefully through the rubble-strewn square. There's no cheering, no glory, just the sound of boots on broken stone. In a side street, you notice something strange. A soldier leads a small group of prisoners, civilians. Mostly. Among them, two women walk with heads bowed. Their faces streaked with dust and fear. The men around you avert their eyes. No one wants to look too long. They all know what happens next, even if no one will say it aloud. Conquest, in every age, has its rituals, and none are noble. When walls fall and resistance ends, desire and dominance blur until they become the same thing. For medieval warriors, this was the darkest inheritance of war, a space where morality collapsed beneath the weight of victory. You follow the soldiers as they herd the prisoners toward the edge of the camp. Some are bound for ransom, others for servitude, and a few, for something worse. Commanders issue orders to maintain order. But the words carry little meaning when blood and adrenaline still hum through the veins of men who have stared too long into death. Not every soldier joins in the cruelty. You see one turn away, gripping his sword until his knuckles whiten. Another quietly unties a captive's hands and tells her to run before anyone notices. Compassion, even here, flickers like a candle in a storm, brief, trembling, but real. Later, as night falls, the camp feasts. The victory feels hollow. The air is thick with roasted meat, spilled ale, and the kind of laughter that sounds like denial. You sit near the fire and listen to the stories twisting through the crowd. Boasts turned lies. Lies turned silence. A young archer stares into the flames, his face pale. They said it's what conquerors do. He murmurs. But when I close my eyes, I don't feel like a conqueror. His companion nods, staring at his cup. We'll confess it later, he says. That's what the priests are for. The archer laughs, bitterly. And who forgives the priests? You think back to the sermons about divine justice, about holy war, about purity. The words sound emptier now. For every banner raised in God's name, there's a shadow that no amount of prayer can bleach clean. Historians often skip these chapters. They call them incidents or unfortunate excesses. But for those who lived through it, this wasn't a footnote, it was the center of the story. It was how humanity coped with power, by breaking it, by misusing it, by mistaking hunger for victory. And yet, in the ruins, life continues to reach for something gentler. You find a wounded prisoner tending to her captor's injuries, binding his arm with the same cloth that once tied her own wrists. Neither speaks. It's not forgiveness, not even mercy, just survival wearing the mask of grace. The church would later send letters of reprimand, demanding repentance for indecent acts. Some commanders would order fasts and prayers, others public punishments to restore discipline. But all of it came after the fact. After the smoke and screams had faded. Confession was never prevention, it was cleanup. Still, some tried to atone. You hear of a knight who donated his share of plunder to a monastery, claiming he wished to buy back his soul. Another took a vow of silence for a year, though rumor had it he broke it after a week when someone stole his boots. You find yourself wondering what redemption means in a world where sin is the price of survival. As the fire dies down, you walk through the sleeping camp. Some soldiers lie sprawled in drunken peace, others twitch in restless dreams. Near a wagon, you see one man praying beside a sleeping woman he clearly should not have taken. His lips move quickly, the prayer spilling out between breaths. Forgive me. Forgive me. Forgive me. It's hard to tell whether he's praying to God or to her. The night stretches on, heavy and slow. Somewhere in the distance, an owl calls, soft, hollow, ancient. You sit on a stone wall, watching the stars flicker faintly through the smoke. The sky looks so calm, as if it doesn't notice what humans do beneath it. Historians still debate what drives this part of the story: lust, power, desperation, or simply the madness of war. Maybe all of them, woven together into something too dark to untangle. But standing here, you realize it isn't about desire at all. It's about loneliness turned violent. About men who've forgotten what tenderness feels like, trying to remember it the only way they still can. A soldier stumbles past you, muttering something in his sleep. His sword drags in the dirt. The moon catches his face, it's streaked with tears. You stay awake until the fires burn out. The camp wrapped in uneasy silence. The smell of smoke and iron lingers. But underneath it, there's something softer. The faint scent of rosemary and candle wax from the chapel tent nearby. The priests are still praying, voices hoarse but steady, as if they can drown out the ghosts. You close your eyes and listen. Some sins can't be confessed. Some simply echo, generation after generation, until the silence finally learns how to hold them. The days blur into one another: marches, skirmishes, mud, and the constant hum of fear. But tonight, the camp feels different. There's a rumor whispered from tent to tent. The kind of story that grows brighter with every retelling. A woman in armor fought among them today. At first, no one believes it. A woman? In battle? But then someone swears they saw her, tall, quick, her sword flashing like lightning. Another claims she rode beside the standard bearer. Her helmet plume torn but her stance unshaken. And suddenly, the camp is buzzing. Curiosity, awe, disbelief, and something else, something quieter, harder to name. You find her later, sitting alone near the edge of the camp. Her armor is dented, her hands raw, her hair unbound. Up close, she looks neither saint nor sorceress, just exhausted. You sit beside her without speaking. She glances at you briefly, then back at the fire. They thought I was one of them, she says finally. Her voice is low, even, without pride, until I took off the helmet. You ask her why she did it. Why risk everything to stand among men who barely understand the women who follow them? Much less fight beside them. She smiles faintly, because no one believes you can. Until you do. Her name doesn't matter. It'll be forgotten by the chroniclers anyway. But her story lingers. She disguised herself as a squire. Learned to fight. Learned to swear. Learned to make herself invisible. She says that the hardest part wasn't killing, it was pretending not to feel. Men can shout, boast, rage, she says, but if I wept once, it would ruin everything. You study her face. There's a bruise near her jaw, a scar along her forearm, and something fierce behind her eyes. It's not defiance. It's freedom, the rarest kind. She tells you how she joined the army 2 years ago after her brother died. No one asked too many questions. She says, war doesn't care who you are, only whether you can stand. For a while, you sit in silence, listening to the fire crackle. The men nearby are singing bawdy songs, voices slurred with ale. She watches them with a faint, amused smile. They'd die if they knew. She says, not from shame, from confusion. You ask her if she's afraid of being discovered. Every day, she says, but fear doesn't keep you alive. Purpose does. She looks at her sword, clean, well kept. They think the world is divided between those who fight and those who are fought over. She adds, but they forget. Women have always fought. Just not always with blades. The firelight flickers across her face. And for a moment, you can see both weariness and triumph. You wonder if she has someone waiting for her at home, a husband, a lover, a secret she'll never speak aloud. She doesn't say, and you don't ask. Still, you can't help thinking of the irony. The same men who lust for women in brothels and dream of ladies in distant castles would recoil if they knew one had slept beside them in armor. It's as though the idea of a woman as equal, not object, threatens the fragile order of their world. And yet, here she is, proof that desire and strength can live in the same body. Later that night, you walk with her through the camp. The moon is thin, pale. She moves quietly, light on her feet, every gesture deliberate. Passing soldiers greet her with nods, mistaking her for one of their own. You notice her small smile, the strange pleasure of being seen but not known. In her tent, she removes her armor piece by piece, laying it out with careful reverence. Beneath the padding, her body bears the same bruises as any other soldier, and maybe a few more. You help her pour water from a jug. And for a moment, she pauses, staring into the reflection trembling in the bowl. Sometimes, she says softly, I forget what my face looks like. You realize that disguise isn't just protection, it's erasure. She tells you of another woman she once met in a distant campaign. A healer who dressed as a monk to move freely among the wounded. She said the world only listens when it thinks you're a man. The warrior recalls, so she borrowed the voice it trusted. The fire burns low. The camp grows quiet. You can hear the distant sound of prayer. Or maybe it's just the wind slipping through the tents. Historians rarely wrote about women like her. When they did, they turned them into myths, saints, witches, martyrs, anything but human. But sitting here beside her, you see the truth. She's none of those things. She's just tired, alive, and unwilling to disappear quietly. You ask her what she'll do when the war ends. She chuckles. You think it ever ends? Then, more softly, maybe I'll go back to being nobody. Or maybe I'll keep the armor. She looks at you, eyes glinting in the firelight. The armor listens better than most men. When she finally lies down to sleep, you step outside and look up at the sky. The stars are faint tonight, half swallowed by smoke. Somewhere beyond the horizon, songs will be written about the heroes of this war, but not her. Not the woman who fought beside them, who killed and bled and dared to exist. You stand there a while, the cold creeping into your bones, and think, history is not kind to the quiet brave. A gust of wind flutters through the camp, rustling the banners, whispering her secret to the darkness. You promise yourself you'll remember her, even if the world won't. The morning breaks with the sound of bells, not the usual clang of metal or the cry of horns, but something softer, more solemn. You follow the sound to a large tent draped in white. A red cross hangs at its entrance, flapping gently in the breeze. Inside, men kneel in rows, heads bowed, hands clasped. These are no ordinary soldiers. Their armor is plain, their banners unadorned. These are the holy warriors, the knights of the monastic orders. You watch as a man in his 30s kneels before the altar. His face is calm, his lips trembling as he repeats the vow. The master of the order, cloaked in black and white, places a hand on his head. You renounce all fleshly pleasures. The master says, and give yourself to God alone. The man answers softly, I do. The tent is silent. Only the wind outside dares to move. When the ceremony ends, the new knight rises, his expression solemn, almost serene, but you notice his hands, clenched, pale, as if gripping something invisible. The vow of chastity. It sounds noble, beautiful even, in the echo of prayer. But outside these walls, it becomes a battle as relentless as any fought with swords. The Templars, the Hospitallers, the Teutonic Knights, men who carried both cross and blade, believed purity strengthened their purpose. They were to live as monks, yet fight as warriors, to serve both heaven and the battlefield. And somewhere between those two extremes, the human body became an enemy. You walk among their camp. Everything is clean, orderly, disciplined. No women here, no laughter after dark, no songs that speak of love. The tents are lined like tombstones. The silence so deep you can hear the faint creak of rosary beads sliding through fingers. A young knight sits sharpening his sword, humming under his breath. The melody is soft, too soft for a soldier. You ask what it is. He hesitates, then says, "A song my sister used to sing before I took the vows." His voice cracks slightly, and he clears his throat as though erasing it. "It helps me remember who I was." You realize the cruelty of their devotion, to kill for God. But never touch another human with tenderness. To see beauty and call it temptation. To feel longing and call it sin. They built walls around their hearts and named them virtue. Still, the walls have cracks. Later that day, you see two Templar brothers standing alone near the supply cart. Speaking in low tones, one of them looks around nervously, then reaches into his tunic and hands the other a small folded parchment. The exchange is quick, practiced, almost furtive. When they part, neither looks back. You recognize the look in their eyes, that quiet guilt born from wanting what they were forbidden even to imagine. Historians like to call them paragons of discipline. But even saints had flesh. And flesh remembers. Rumors followed these holy orders everywhere. Some whispered that they indulged in secret sins behind monastery walls. Others accused them of heresy, of unnatural acts. The truth, as always, is murkier, not scandal, but struggle. Men who had sworn to renounce their bodies found themselves trapped inside them. You speak with one of their priests, an older man with eyes as sharp as flint. "Do you think your brothers truly live without desire?" you ask. He exhales slowly, as if the question itself is dangerous. "Desire," he says, "is like fire. It can warm or it can destroy. We are taught to carry the coal without letting it burn the flesh." You press further, "And if it does?" "Then," he murmurs, "we confess, we fast, and we pray that God has more patience than men do." You leave him and wander to the chapel tent. Inside, candles flicker over a carved wooden cross. Beneath it lies a collection of items left by the knights, tokens of the world they gave up. A lock of hair, a ring, a ribbon stained with dried tears. Each one is an echo of a life they were told to forget. You imagine what it must be like to kneel here night after night, fighting battles no one else can see. To watch others take comfort in a touch, a kiss, a whispered word, and tell yourself you have chosen something higher. Even as your soul aches for something simpler. Outside, dusk paints the sky gold. The knights gather for evening prayer, kneeling in perfect lines, their voices rising in measured unison. The chant is haunting, deep, resonant, almost mournful. You can feel the tension in every note. Men trying to turn longing into worship. The world will remember them as warriors of faith, conquerors in the name of purity. But you, standing here, see something different. You see men who fought their own humanity as fiercely as any enemy, and lost. Quietly, 1,000 times over. One knight finishes praying and stands beside you. His face is young, his eyes impossibly tired. Sometimes, he admits softly, "I think God made us human just to see how long we could pretend we're not." You don't answer. There's nothing to say. As night falls, the chanting fades into silence. The stars appear, cold and sharp, above the disciplined rows of tents. You watch the men file into their quarters, each one carrying a heart full of contradictions, devotion and doubt, faith and hunger. In the stillness, you whisper the truth they'll never dare speak aloud. Holiness and desire aren't opposites. They're just different ways of reaching for something beyond the self. The wind moves through the camp, tugging gently at the banners, as if even the air itself pities them. You turn away, leaving behind the faint glow of candles, men's prayers flickering weakly against the vast, unblinking night. The wind rises again that night, carrying with it the groans of tents and the rattle of armor. You sit near the fire, watching sparks drift upward into the dark like tiny, desperate souls. Around you, the soldiers are quiet, the sort of quiet that only comes after too many battles and too many sermons. Everyone's pretending not to think about what they've given up, or what they still secretly crave. The campaign has dragged on for months now. The food is gone, the coins are spent, and faith, both divine and personal, has begun to taste like ash. Even the holy warriors who once spoke with fire in their voices now mumble their prayers like men reciting debts. And debts they are, in a way, to their vows, their God, their commanders, their own brittle sense of honor. You wander through the camp, past men lying awake, staring at nothing. You can feel the exhaustion in the air, not just in their bodies, but in their souls. Every virtue has limits, and theirs is cracking. They say that long wars change people, that the mind becomes numb to blood and the heart forgets softness. But that's not entirely true. Some hearts don't harden, they break open instead. You find two knights sitting apart from the rest, their armor half removed, their swords laid on the ground between them. They speak in hushed tones. You recognize one of them, the young knight from the Order of Chastity, the one who once hummed his sister's song. The other is older, his hair silver at the temples, his expression weary but kind. You look like hell, the older says quietly. I think hell looks like me, the younger answers. They share a small laugh, but it's a brittle sound. The younger one rubs his face with both hands. I tried, he says. I really did. The fasting, the prayers, the flagellation. I thought I could burn it out of myself. But it doesn't go away. It just hides. The older knight nods slowly. We all hide something. The silence between them stretches. You know what's coming, not in words, but in the way their bodies lean slightly closer, drawn by something both forbidden and inevitable. When it happens, it isn't dramatic. There's no sudden declaration, no sin-laced passion, just two tired men sharing warmth in a world that has none left. Their touch is tentative, trembling, not lust, not rebellion, just relief, a quiet surrender to what's human. For a brief moment, the war disappears, the armor, the vows, the shame, all of it melts away in that fragile space between breath and heartbeat. Later, they'll pretend it never happened. One will pray until his lips bleed. The other will volunteer for the most dangerous watch. As if punishment can undo tenderness. But for now, they simply exist, two souls remembering what it feels like not to be alone. You turn away, giving them privacy. Some things, even history, should learn to keep secrets. When dawn comes, the camp stirs again. The knights line up for inspection. Their faces blank, their movements mechanical. The younger one keeps his gaze low, the older stands a little too straight. His jaw clenched. They don't speak, they don't need to. The silence between them is both confession and absolution. A priest gives them the morning blessing, sprinkling cold water over their helmets. It glints in the sunlight like tears. You overhear the commander giving orders. "We march at noon," he says. There's word of another siege ahead. The soldiers groan, but no one disobeys. They've learned that obedience is easier than thought. As the camp dismantles itself, ropes pulled, tents packed, ashes scattered, you notice small signs of wear. A broken cross discarded in the mud. A charm left hanging on a stake. A page torn from a prayer book used to wrap a wound. These are relics of people trying to be better than their nature. And failing gracefully. Historians love to write about discipline, the glory of vows, the strength of self-control. They don't write about what happens when vows meet loneliness, or when holiness turns into hunger, or when men start bargaining with themselves just to make it through another night. You think of that young knight again, how he whispered once that God made humans just to see how long they could pretend not to be. Maybe this is what he meant. Maybe the test was never purity, but compassion, to forgive oneself for being human, even when the world doesn't. The army marches out by midday, leaving behind the blackened circles of campfires and the ghosts of their unspoken confessions. The road ahead winds through hills dusted with frost. The wind bites harder here, sharp and clean. You pull your cloak tighter and follow, your breath visible in the cold. The column moves like a slow river of metal and fatigue. Somewhere near the front, you hear someone start to sing, a low, wavering chant that spreads gradually, picked up by tired voices. It's not a hymn or a war song. It's something in between, a lament turned lullaby. A prayer whispered to no one in particular. You close your eyes and let the sound carry you. For all their sins, their vows, their endless contradictions, these men are still reaching for light, even if it's only the faint glow of dawn breaking through the mist. The road stretches endlessly ahead, but for now, they walk together, and that, perhaps, is enough. The army reaches a river by dusk. The water runs black beneath the fading sky. Slow and cold, the men are exhausted, but when the smell of ale and cooked meat drifts from a cluster of wooden buildings on the opposite bank, they come alive again. The banners lower, the tension loosens, and the sound of laughter trickles back into the air. There's a tavern here, if you can call it that. A sagging roof, smoke curling from a chimney, light spilling through cracks in the walls. The soldiers pour in like moths to flame. The barkeep, a woman with arms like tree branches and a permanent frown, doesn't ask questions. She just fills mugs and takes coins. Inside, it feels almost like peace. Almost. The tables groan under the weight of mugs and elbows. Someone's singing a song too cheerful for men this weary. A group of archers arm wrestle in the corner. One of them cheats outrageously. But nobody cares. You take a seat near the fire, where the air smells of ale, wood smoke, and the faint sweetness of roasted apples. Then come the minstrels, or rather, two travelers with a lute and a drum, earning their supper the old-fashioned way. The man strums, the woman sings. Her voice isn't perfect, but it's warm, and for the first time in weeks, the camp seems to remember what joy sounds like. She sings of love and loss, of rivers that forget names, of hands that reach and never touch. The soldiers, drunk and softened by memory, fall silent. Some wipe their eyes without realizing it. Even the barkeep pauses, leaning on the counter as if trying to remember her own forgotten tenderness. You look around and see the strange transformation of men at rest. The armor sits in corners. The swords lean against walls, as if war itself has been asked to wait outside for one night. These are no longer warriors. They're fathers, sons, lovers, ghosts of the people they used to be. At the far end of the room, an old knight leans forward, chin in hand, watching the singer. When the song ends, he raises his mug. Another, he says, one for the lost. The minstrel nods and begins again, slower this time, sadder. The lyrics tell of a widow waiting at the window, her candle burning low, whispering her lover's name into the dark. The refrain is simple, just 4 words repeated like a heartbeat. Come home to me. You can see it happen, how the song turns the air heavy. One man lowers his head into his hands. Another stares into the fire as if he could find her face there. Even the laughter at the bar fades. For a moment, the tavern feels like a chapel. And yet, beneath the sorrow, there's comfort too. Music, like desire, has always been the safest sin. It gives shape to what no confession ever could. When the song ends, no one claps. They just breathe, slow, uneven, grateful. The woman gives a small bow, her eyes shining. She knows what she's done. She's given them something they can't name. A kind of fragile absolution. Later, as the night deepens, the tone shifts again. Someone pulls the minstrel toward the center of the room and demands a drinking song. The drum pounds. Mugs slam against the tables. The rhythm grows wild, reckless, alive. You can't help but laugh as a burly soldier climbs onto the table to dance, badly, gloriously. His friends cheer him on. Even the holy knights grin in spite of themselves. A soldier leans toward you and shouts over the music. This is what we fight for. He sloshes ale over his hand and doesn't care. Not kings or God. This. The noise. The warmth. The living. You nod. He's right. For all the sermons and vows. This is what keeps them going. The taste of bread. The burn of drink. The sound of music. The brief illusion of home. Outside, rain begins to fall again. It drums softly on the roof, mingling with the rhythm of the lute and laughter. You step outside for air. The cool, damp breeze brushing your face. Through the window, you see them still, silhouettes moving, singing, holding one another up in a dance that's half joy, half defiance. War takes everything, but nights like this remind them that not everything can be taken. You walk down to the riverbank, the water whispering under the moonlight. Somewhere behind you, the song changes again, slower now. Almost a lullaby. You can't make out the words. But you don't need to. You know what they mean. We're still here. Historians never write about taverns. They prefer battles, treaties, heroes. But you understand now that these places, smoky, loud, fragile, were the true sanctuaries of the medieval heart. Here, men remembered they were alive. And that was miracle enough. As you turn back toward the tavern, the door swings open and laughter bursts into the night. The warmth spills out, reaching you like an embrace. You smiled to yourself. Tomorrow they'll march again, fight again, sin again, but tonight, at least, they've earned their humanity back, one song, one sip, one fleeting heartbeat at a time. You take a breath of the rain-heavy air and whisper into the dark. Almost like a prayer. Let them have this night. Morning arrives heavy, as if the sky itself regrets interrupting the night. The tavern is quiet now. The fire has gone out. The tables are littered with empty mugs and spilled ale. And the soldiers lie scattered like fallen statues, armor half-fastened. Cloaks tangled around limbs, mouths open in sleep, a few groan as you pass, clutching their heads, whispering promises to never drink again, promises that will dissolve by sunset. The road ahead leads to another siege. Word spreads quickly through the camp. A fortress stands in the distance. High on a hill, thick-walled and unbroken, the commanders call it a strategic objective. The soldiers call it something simpler, trouble. Sieges are strange things. They're wars within wars, stretched thin by hunger, boredom, and fear. And when a siege drags on, something begins to change in people. The lines between discipline and despair blur. And so do the rules that hold a man together. Days turn into weeks. Food runs low. Tempers snap. The soldiers grow gaunt, their cheeks hollow, their eyes sunken with exhaustion. The rain never stops, a slow, miserable drizzle that soaks everything, including the spirit. The fortress looms above, indifferent, while below, life collapses into mud and waiting. You walk through the camp and hear fragments of conversation. Men arguing about bread. Priests muttering about faith. Women counting dwindling supplies. You see one soldier gnawing at leather, pretending it's meat. Another stares blankly at the gray sky, lips moving as if he's talking to someone who isn't there. And then, inevitably, desire returns, warped, hungry, and desperate. Loneliness grows teeth in times like these. You can feel it everywhere, in the way men linger near the healer's tent a little too long, in the way they stare into the fire as though it might remember them. Some sneak away into the shadows, searching for warmth in whatever form it still exists. Others numb themselves with drink, or prayer, or superstition, but the craving beneath it all is the same: to feel something that isn't war. You sit beside a group of archers huddled around a dying fire. One of them, barely more than a boy, speaks quietly. "My wife," he says, "she used to hum when she cooked. Just hum, not sing. It made everything seem safe." No one answers. They just nod, lost in their own memories. The fire crackles weakly. That night, after the rain stops, the camp changes. A strange energy ripples through it, the kind that comes when death feels close enough to touch. Laughter returns, louder, almost manic. Someone produces a jug of stolen wine. Another finds a fiddle. A soldier lights torches and shouts, "If tomorrow we die, tonight we live." And they do. They dance barefoot in the mud, spinning and shouting, faces lit by flame and defiance. The women join in, their skirts heavy with rainwater, their laughter fierce. Even a few priests watch from the edges, shaking their heads but smiling in spite of themselves. It isn't debauchery, not really. It's survival disguised as celebration. A final rebellion against the hopelessness closing in. You watch a young couple swaying near the fire. Their movements are clumsy but tender. They don't speak, they just hold on to each other, as though letting go would mean surrender. You can see the dirt on their faces, the scars on their hands, the fear in their eyes. And yet, Somehow, they look more alive than anyone you've seen in months. The music slows. Someone starts a song, low and steady. It's not a war chant this time, but a simple tune about spring, about green fields and returning home. The voices rise together, rough and imperfect, but it sounds like hope. For a moment, you forget where you are. You forget the fortress looming above, the starvation waiting in the days ahead. You just hear the song, see the faces lit by firelight, and think, this is what it means to endure. Historians won't write about this night. They'll record the siege, the casualties, the strategies. They won't mention the dancing, the laughter, the fleeting humanity stolen back from the edge of despair. But these are the things that kept people alive, not victories. Not faith, not fear. Moments. Just moments. Later, when the fires die and the singing fades, the camp grows quiet again. You walk between the sleeping bodies, their faces soft in the glow of embers. A few still hold hands, even in sleep. You stop by the healer's tent. Inside, she's awake, grinding herbs by candlelight. You should rest, you tell her. She shakes her head. I'll rest when they stop bleeding. You ask her if she believes they'll win. She smiles sadly. People don't need to win, she says. They just need to make it to morning. Outside, the first pale streaks of dawn touch the horizon. The fortress still stands, unmoved, uncaring. But down here, among the mud and the broken, the fire of life still flickers, stubborn, ridiculous, magnificent. You breathe in the cold air and whisper to no one, one more night. And in that moment, you realize the truth. Survival is not a victory. It's a ritual, a small, defiant prayer whispered against the endless dark. The wind carries the faintest echo of laughter from the dying campfires, fragile proof that, even surrounded by death, the living still remember how to live. The siege finally breaks, but not in triumph. It collapses. Hunger wins before any army does. By the time the gates fall, there is no strength left for celebration, only relief. Hollow and heavy. The town inside is ruined. Its streets are choked with ash. Its wells poisoned. Its people silent. You walk through the broken archway with the soldiers, boots crunching over splintered wood and bone. The stench hits first, smoke, sweat, decay, and then the stillness. Like the world holding its breath. Some men cheer, though weakly. Others stare blankly, unable to decide whether they've conquered or merely survived. The commanders speak of order and victory. The priests speak of God's will. But the soldiers, those who've waited, starved, and watched friends die, have no language left for glory. They move like ghosts through the ruins, searching for food, or shelter, or something to make them feel human again. You find one sitting on a doorstep, cradling a loaf of bread as though it were treasure. He sees you and laughs bitterly. We fought for weeks, he says, and this is what victory tastes like, stale and hard. He breaks the loaf in half and offers you a piece. You take it, though you're not sure either of you has the appetite. As night falls, the fires start again. Some are for warmth, others for burning the dead. The flames flicker against crumbling walls, painting the faces around you in red and shadow. A priest walks through the rubble, clutching a crucifix. He stops beside a fallen soldier and kneels to pray. You watch his lips move soundlessly. When he rises, his eyes are wet, so many to bury. He murmurs. And still they sin as if time is endless. He's not wrong. Already, the vices return, the old rhythm of exhaustion. Lust, guilt, and confession reasserts itself. As predictable as the tide. Soldiers barter for trinkets, steal from the dead, reach for comfort in any form that will take them. You pass a makeshift chapel inside what used to be a merchant's house. The pews are gone, replaced with straw mats. Men kneel shoulder to shoulder, whispering prayers they half remember. One repeats the same words over and over. Forgive me. Forgive me. Forgive me. You realize that forgiveness has become its own form of hunger. And then there are the others. The ones who don't pray anymore. They sit apart, staring at nothing, hollow-eyed. You see one sharpening his knife. Though there's nothing left to fight. Another hums a song from the tavern nights ago. His voice cracking on every note. When you ask a knight if he believes the siege was worth it, he shrugs. We won, he says simply. Then, after a pause, but I can't remember why. The healer works tirelessly, her hands red from cold and blood. She moves between the wounded and the dying, whispering quiet comforts. You notice how gently she touches them, even the ones beyond saving. It's not faith that drives her anymore, it's habit. Mercy, maybe stubbornness. She looks up at you once. Eyes hollow. You see why they need sin? She says softly. It's the only thing that still feels like choice. Her words linger as you walk outside again. In the courtyard, the soldiers gather around a small fountain that still trickles water. One of them cups his hands and drinks. Another splashes his face, as if he could wash off the war. But the stains run deeper than dirt. Historians will later call this a victory, clean, decisive, necessary. They'll list the date, the commanders, the casualties. They'll praise the bravery, perhaps even the piety, but they won't write about the smell, the silence, the way the survivors sit with their backs against burned walls, too tired to move, too alive to rest. They won't write about the woman who picks up a child from the rubble, brushes ash from his hair, and hums a lullaby through cracked lips, or the soldier who gives her his cloak, then walks away before she can thank him. They won't mention that after every war, the living spend years learning how to be people again. You sit on a broken stone and look around. The firelight wavers. The night is filled with small sounds, the cough of the dying, the rustle of cloth, the distant hum of a prayer that refuses to die out. For the first time in a long while, the camp is still. No orders, no marching, no pretending, just exhaustion and the fragile pulse of survival. A voice beside you says, "When this ends, I'll build a chapel." You turn to see an old soldier staring into the flames. "Not for saints," he adds. "For us, the ones God forgot to write down." You nod. It's the closest thing to hope anyone has spoken all night. The fire pops, sending a shower of sparks into the air. They rise briefly, then vanish into the dark. You watch them go, thinking they look a lot like souls, bright for a moment, then gone without sound. You lie down near the warmth, your cloak wrapped tight, your thoughts heavy and strange. Tomorrow, the commanders will move on to another campaign, another siege, another story to be told differently in the books. But tonight, among the broken walls and quiet fires, you understand something simple and final. Wars don't end when the fighting stops. They end when the survivors stop needing to be forgiven. And that, you suspect, may take a lifetime. The morning after the siege feels like waking from a nightmare that refuses to end. The camp is quiet, too quiet, the kind of silence that only follows exhaustion so deep it silences even grief. You open your eyes to pale light spilling over the ruined town. The kind that makes everything look washed clean, though nothing truly is. Smoke rises in lazy spirals from the last of the fires. The ground is slick with rain and ash. You can taste metal on the air, not blood exactly, but memory of it. Around you, the camp stirs slowly, not with energy, but with the brittle stiffness of people who have forgotten what rest means. Men move through the ruins like sleepwalkers. Some gather what's left of supplies. Some repair armor that will soon be broken again. A few kneel before makeshift crosses hammered from scrap wood. Their prayers are quiet, uncertain, drifting upward into a sky that no longer feels like it's listening. You wander toward the edge of town, where a river winds through the valley. Swollen from weeks of rain, the water runs brown and fast, carrying away pieces of things, a plank, a boot, a memory. You sit on a stone and watch it for a long time. This, you realize, is what remains when the banners fall and the sermons end. Not victory, not redemption, just a slow, relentless moving forward, the river's indifference. The world's quiet demand that you keep living whether you want to or not. Behind you, you hear the faint sound of hammering. A group of soldiers is building something near the chapel tent, not fortifications this time, but a cairn, a mound of stones for the dead. Each man adds one, wordless. The gesture is clumsy, but honest. It's what passes for mourning here. You walk closer. The healer is there too. Her hands bandaged, her face pale with fatigue. She places a small wooden cross on top of the stones. Its arms uneven. There, she says softly, something to tell the earth we were here. No one speaks. They just stand, heads bowed, as the wind whistles through the ruined streets. For the first time, you notice how different the silence feels, not hollow anymore, but full, like the earth itself is listening. Later, when the camp begins to move again, the soldiers pack their things in near silence. No boasting, no songs, not even the clatter of armor feels the same. They move carefully, like men afraid of breaking whatever fragile piece this place has managed to grow overnight. One of the knights, the same one who once joked about sin and salvation, passes by you. His face is thinner, his eyes older. He stops for a moment and says quietly, "I used to think holiness meant purity. Now I think it just means trying again tomorrow." You nod. It's not wisdom carved in stone. But it's something truer. The kind of truth you only find when everything else has been burned away. As the sun rises higher, you walk back through what remains of the camp. The women gather what little they own. A few children play near the riverbank, their laughter startling in its lightness. Even here, where sorrow clings to every surface, life has begun to stitch itself back together. You find the priest near the chapel tent, his robe torn, his hands shaking as he lights a final candle. "For whom?" you ask. "For everyone," he says simply. "The sinners, the saints, and the ones who couldn't tell the difference." You watch the flame flicker in the breeze. It bends, trembles, but doesn't go out. There's something almost beautiful in that. this fragile persistence of light. It doesn't erase the darkness. Doesn't even fight it. It just exists beside it. Quietly. Stubbornly. You step outside again. The sky is clearing. Pale blue creeping through the clouds. The wind carries the faint smell of grass. Clean and new. You take a breath. The first one that doesn't hurt. Behind you, the army begins to move. The slow rumble of wheels and footsteps fading into distance. They'll go on to another place. Another story. Another struggle between faith and flesh. Duty and desire. That's the way of things. History doesn't end, it just changes its armor. You linger by the river a little longer. The water glints now in the sunlight. Alive and endless. You think of all the faces you've seen. All the small, fragile moments of humanity hidden inside so much violence. The laughter in the tavern. The quiet touch in the dark. The whispered prayers. Not for victory, but for forgiveness. You realize then that desire, the thing everyone tried so hard to suppress, punish, or disguise, was never the enemy. It was the last proof of being human. The heartbeat beneath the armor. The warmth beneath the vow. The spark that refused to die even when everything else did. You close your eyes and listen. The river murmurs softly, as if in agreement. The camp is gone now. The world moving on without you. You lie back on the grass. The sun warm against your face. And let the sound of water and wind blur together. Your thoughts slow. The edges of the world begin to fade. The story you followed, of sin and struggle, of men and their longing, quiets into something like peace. And as the last of the voices drift away, you whisper into the wind, let them rest. The river answers only with silence. But it's a kind silence, soft, forgiving, eternal. The air cools, the light dims. And somewhere in that fading warmth, you hear the echo of every breath, every heartbeat, every whispered confession that ever dared to exist. End of script. Sweet dreams.